Just a few things. Just a few things about Mike. So Mike is a really experienced biomedical scientist who's got a PhD from the University of Leeds and an MBA from Warwick Business School. He's had a series of senior roles within the biomedical industry, including Smith Nephew and 3M Health. He's currently Chief Executive Officer of F Thackray, which was spun out as Smith Nephew in 2007, focusing on regenerative tissue repair technologies. He's also an associate professor at the University of Leeds in the area of engineering management and innovation, and is a principal investigator for a Global Challenges Research Fund project focusing on biomedical engineering in East Africa. So I'll hand over to Mike now. So thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Harvey. Thank you, Malcolm. Excuse me for the invitation tonight. Really pleased to be able to speak to you. So as Harvey says, I'm speaking about Yorkshire as an innovation hub for MedTech, and I'll go through the terms that I'm using in the next slide or two. But just to give you an idea of the scope of medical technology, medical technology or MedTech, I normally talk about MedTech. This, so we haven't got a live poll, but just as a bit of fun, what do you think is which medical technology you think you consider to have the most impact on the response to COVID-19? So all the things on my slide here are MedTech. So we're not voting, just a bit of fun, have a think about those things, but they've all made an impact on our lives in the last nearly 2 years. So they're all medical technology of different types. Of course, the PCR is looking at the virus there in a sample, and the testing is done and the results come back. We may think of things like ventilators as more standard medical technology or medical engineering, but that is just another type. PPE, not all PPE is MedTech. Some of it qualifies as MedTech, some of it qualifies by other regulations, but some of it is MedTech. Remote GP consultations, telemedicine. Obviously, we're not seeing our GPs in the same way that we used to pre-pandemic. So all those things have had an impact of different types. Another one here. What do you think has the most potential, again, to change healthcare provision? And I won't claim the Internet of Things as being MedTech, but it has a MedTech component. Medical devices connect via the Internet of Things. So again, have a think about that. Last one's artificial intelligence for rapid diagnosis. And I'd probably say was that will come through and make the biggest impact. So it would save the radiologist a lot of time and fatigue and be able to spot patterns in medical imaging. It does much quicker than the human radiologist. Of course, we still need to have that that human oversight, but it's just an interesting thing that we can speed up a lot using things like AI. Okay, so this is a bit about me. So Harvey's given me that introduction, so thank you very much. I won't go through the line by line here, but most of my career has been in industry. So yeah, I've been at Pfizer, 3M, Smith Nephew for a number of years, and then F Thackray, which is a spin-out, actually spin-outs from Smith Nephew. So last 33 years has predominantly been in industry. The last dozen or so years, I've had a foot in academia as well. So I've been involved part-time with the IKC, the Innovation and Knowledge Centre in Medical Technology at the University of Leeds. So I've done that. I had a role as operations director of a thing called Regenerate, which is specifically on regenerative medicine. That came to an end a few years ago, but I came in specifically to do that job. And for the last year, nearly a year anyway, I've been associate professor in engineering management and innovation. So specifically talking, or particularly talking about MedTech, more generally about innovation, obviously, but MedTech is what I get the chance to speak about to students quite regularly. So that's my background and my history, if you like. But let me talk about what do I mean by MedTech? What is MedTech? So a bit of a definition on this slide. It describes medical devices, and medical devices is again a very defined term. That's defined by a lot of regulations, but these are internationally agreed terms. So MedTech is medical devices which are used for therapeutic and diagnostic purposes, both of those things. So therapeutic devices might be orthopedic implants, hips, knees, and so on, insulin pumps, pacemakers. Those are all therapeutic devices. Diagnostic devices might be things like colonoscopy, so that the surgeon can take a look inside the colon. Lateral flow assays devices we're all familiar with, magnetic resonance imaging, MRI imaging. Those are all, some of them are big diagnostic kit, but they're used, of course, to identify a patient's health status before, during and after treatment. So we're talking both therapeutic and diagnostic in this term. So it covers a lot of technology, a lot of ground. So I'm going to give you a bit of history. So this is Leeds. Leeds as a medical technology centre. So the strong heritage. So we go back at least to this event. Charles F Thackray, started supplying sterile wound dressings and surgical instruments from his pharmacy shop in Great George Street. And you can see on the image on the slide, you can see the town hall, Leeds Town Hall in the background. His shop is on the left. Over the road, or looking almost where we're looking, will be the LGI. So very strategically placed operation for supplying into a major hospital at that time. So Thackray started that shop in 1906 in Great George Street. Little further away, a little further afield, but still Yorkshire, T.J. Smith started selling cod liver oil, supplying cod liver oil from Hull Docks. He started that in 1856. He was eventually joined by his nephew, the splendidly named Horatio Nelson Smith, to form Smith Nephew. So they formed Smith Nephew in 1896. A lot of my time, a lot of my personal time has been involved with Smith Nephew. So I was there when this 150-year anniversary came up from 1856 to 2006. I was there at the time, and there's a significant history and heritage involved, including a blue plaque in Hull. So that's S&N, Smith Nephew. My own background, as I say, is quite tied up with that. Smith Nephew had a research centre in York, and I moved to York in 1995 to actually be head of biology at this research centre. So I was there for work for them until 2007. But I stayed in this building because our company, Neotherix, spun out Smith Nephew, and we rented space in this building until it closed in 2016. So quite recently, relatively recently, they closed that building and left York. Of course, they still have a major presence in Hull as the manufacturing site for wound management, but the York Research Centre was closed in 2016. So at that point, my company had to find some new premises. Not that easy. Not that easy when you need lab space and some quite high spec labs. So it was quite a loss. Anyway, I spent 20 years in that building between joining and when it closed down. So quite a lot of my life is tied up with that building. What we do now then? So Neotherix, we set it up in 2007. We spun out from Smith Nephew. They kind of incubated it. As I say, we then said, yes, we are going to do this. And so we kind of incorporated in a couple of years later and signed all the license agreements. Our purpose is, and I led a project on this technology of electrospinning which is a way of forming very fine fibers of polymer, resorbable polymer, to which cells will attach, and cells will eventually, as the slide says, populate a wound space or a tissue space, damaged tissue space, and we can thereby use the body's ability to repair itself. So it's a device. We have there's no pharmaceutical stimulation, there's no biological factors involved. We just recognize that cells will attach to these fibers. They'll migrate over those fibers. They'll settle down into one of these interstices and set about making what they need to make to repair a wound. And the beauty of this is that that's a bioresorbable material. So depending on the tissue we're talking about, in 14 days or 6 weeks, depending on how we engineer it, that will be gone. And there's a new tissue that's formed. And we're currently in clinical trials with a number of, well, with actually two products. Currently, we've got an active trial in Birmingham, which is looking at a device to heal a fistula in colorectal surgery. And we're midway through that first in-man trial. Okay, so that's a bit of my background. Going back to Yorkshire as a MedTech hub, so we have other notable entrants. So Swan Morton, set up in Sheffield, well known for their scalpel blades and other surgical instruments. They set up in 1932. Johnson & Johnson acquired a former mill in Gargrave, in North Yorkshire, in 1934, and that was Johnson & Johnson's first full-scale manufacturing plant in the UK. So it's not Leeds, but it's not so far from where we are. Depew Synthes, as they're called now, set up at the site in Beeston in 1957, Beeston in Leeds, 1957. Then more recently, we've got companies like Brandon Medical, they supply, or they manufacture, they develop, supply operating theatre lighting, very high standard, formed in Leeds in 1993. Tissue Regenics spun out from the University of Leeds. My former boss, his colleague, John Fisher, was the inventor of the key patents that led to Tissue Regenics forming and being very successful. And I'll talk a bit about that in a few slides. And then Creavo, this is just a snapshot. This isn't an exhaustive list. Creavo, another company spun out from University of Leeds in 2014. Creavo has a device, a diagnostic device, which is able to diagnose acute myocardial ischemia, or actually is able to rule out that as a cause of patients presenting in the A&E department. So it's able to at point of care, without needing huge equipment, tell the medics, this is not that condition. You can treat it differently. You can take that patient to a ward or other treatment area. So these are all MedTech companies doing very different things, but it all comes under the MedTech umbrella. Let's look at the UK. So these are slightly old figures now, but the Office for Life Sciences doesn't collect this data anymore in the same way. So 2019 is the last thing that they have published on this. But their data on the UK MedTech sector shows that there are 4,450 sites. It's not 4,450 companies, but of those companies, there are that many sites, separate, distinct sites across the UK. Turnover is 25.6 billion UK MedTech, employing over 130,000, 132,000 nearly people. High proportion of those companies are SMEs. So SMEs make up 32% of that employment number, 20% of the turnover of the total MedTech sector in the UK. And they also say that Yorkshire and Humber contributes 10% of the UK's employment in this sector. So if you look at the map, and I know it's quite small on the left to the left of the text, you can see most of the regions are around that kind of number. London and the South East higher, but others are lower than that. So Leeds, Yorkshire and Humber certainly are certainly in there, and they're punching their weight in this sector. So that's the UK. Sorry, the same set of data just talks about the key segments, the dominant segments within MedTech in the UK: digital health, in vitro diagnostics, and single-use devices such as syringes or other things which are sterilized, used once, and then disposed of. Those are dominant segments within the UK. I found some slightly more up-to-date figures. These are via the ABHI, the Association of British Healthcare Industries. And they say in 2022, or beginning of 2022, they know of 4,140 companies. So remember, we talked about sites before. So those figures are probably quite equivalent. 1,140 companies, MedTech companies in the UK. Their turnover is slightly higher than the slide I showed you before, 27.6 billion. Employment slightly higher, 138,100. So we're talking 3 years between these figures. So that might explain all that. And of their membership, they have 81% of their membership being SMEs. It's a very high proportion in this kind of sector. So that's my experience. I know a lot of small companies, SME companies that are doing stuff in MedTech. And actually, it's very often the bigger guys, the Depews and the Smith Nephews, that take great interest in what the SME is doing, because this is some innovation. They're incubating innovation in that way, and then we need, as an SME, we need their expertise to tell us how to scale it up. So that ecosystem, it works very well in this sector. Looking globally, we can say that MedTech is certainly a significant market. You can see at the top of the slide some of the figures here, $432 billion in 2020, but it's growing. It's growing quite rapidly. The growth rate, 5.6%, quoted here, expected to take the world market to nearly $600 billion in 2024, and growing steadily, well, actually impressively, in the next 4 years after that to $658 billion. It's a very significant market. We look at the drivers. We have in the West, we have an increasing and aging population, certainly in the West. Doesn't apply in where I'm doing a lot of work in Africa, very different dynamic and demographics, but in the West, and those that can afford to pay for these things, the dynamic and the demographic is an aging population. Lifestyle decisions obviously drive some of these the needs for some of these technologies. Increasing wealth enables the health services and the patients themselves to afford these things. Access to the internet, so much is connected, and we need to send health data. Sometimes it's from our trackers, and they're not medical devices, by the way, but we could be wearing wearable medical devices that would need to transmit information about our health and health status to a central bank or medic even. So we need access to the internet, and that enables much of this to happen. And obviously technology keeps developing throughout this. And I put at the bottom of the slide, just as a teaser really for what I want to talk about a bit later on, the importance of convergence of technologies. So it's not these days just a hip implant. It may be a hip implant that's textured to encourage osteointegration. And I'll show you other examples of combining technologies in medical technology, and that's where the market is really growing very significantly. Okay, I want to just bring it into back from the UK, back from the global into Leeds, and a lot of the data I've got is on the Leeds city region. So it's the Leeds local enterprise partnership that covers Leeds, covers York, covers Bradford, and you can see the universities involved on the bottom of this slide. So I've got some data from them. We'll talk about this for the next few slides and give you an idea of why Leeds City region is a MedTech innovation hub, or how it comes to be that. So regionally, we have about 250 MedTech businesses within the Leeds City region, and about 200 digital tech businesses that are involved in products that affect our, or not affect our health, that can monitor and track our health, or are involved with recording our health. The University of Leeds hosts a number of centres. Some of the national centres, nationally funded centres. So I mentioned the IKC, the Innovation and Knowledge Centre in Medical Technologies, but there are other initiatives like Grow MedTech, coming to a close, unfortunately. Translate also, Medi, yeah, that has come to a close. More recently though, and just set up and growing now, is the Centre for Health Tech Innovation. So a lot of this work is now finding its home, or its new home, in the Centre for Health Tech Innovation at the university, hosted by the university, and is a partnership between the University of Leeds and the Leeds Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. I mentioned John Fisher already in the context of tissue eugenics. John was my former director at the Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, where IKC is based. In 2015, he was invited, 2016, he was invited to conduct a science and innovation audit of the Leeds City region. And that reported to the UK government, the Department of Business, Enterprise and Skills at that time. So John and his team set about to do that audit, really to say that this built on other work that the government was doing around that time. This is 2015, 2016, 2018 when it was completed. So it builds on these white papers and these strategies that were being put together at that time. The team used methodologies of online surveys, roundtable meetings, consultation with experts, workshops, and so on, to compile the reports that they put together. The region itself, just again in context, it is a large economic region, the largest economic region outside London and the southeast. Population of 3 million people, 120,000 businesses, and so on. Significant footprint when we talk about the higher education institutions, number of graduates, the 2 Russell Group universities at Leeds and York, and so on. But there are downsides. There are things that are below, and I think still are below national averages. So you have on the right of my slide some of the things about productivity, employment rate being less than national average, proportion of working population with higher level skills lower than national average. So a number of things that, if you like, drag the Leeds City region back a bit when you look in the overall context. So in that context, what can MedTech, how can MedTech benefit the Leeds City region? The SIA, Science Innovation Audit, agreed that there were around 250 businesses specializing in MedTech. They identified the strength in digital health within the Leeds City region, 22% of all digital health tech jobs within the UK. They identified the strengths that again, I've talked about the history, the heritage from S&N, Thackray, Depew, and so on, Swan Morton. So significant Sheffield, but significant skills within the overall region. But there's some very interesting initiatives that the SIA team identified as being significant to ensure that MedTech connects to those things. So like the Leeds Care Record, which was developed, is still being developed with enhanced with those companies on the screen, TPP and EMIS. 4 out of 5 NHS England's headquarters are in the Leeds City region. So again, significant bit of connection there. NHS commissioning groups and the presence of coordinating centres, the NIHR, National Institute for Health Research, commissioning, so coordinating centre in the region. So it's really identifying, you've got these medtech companies, you've got these significant players in the ecosystem. We must do everything we can to make sure they have that mutual benefit. So moving on from the SIA, Leeds City region, it says itself now that the Office for Life Sciences recognizes that the region is a significant leader in health tech or MedTech research and development. So their Office for Life Sciences figures say that we're adding substantially more value in the Leeds City region for MedTech than other UK LEP, local enterprise areas, partnership areas, over 20% more compared with other LEPs. And again, they're saying, well, that there are really strong traditional industry strengths. So the companies we've already mentioned, but some others like Surgical Innovations in Leeds, Kairos in Leeds. Kairos are based up at the near the airport, Leeds Bradford Airport. High technology medical textiles is what Kairos specialize in. And of course, adding into those the more recent startups, and I think I mentioned all of these now: Tissue Regenetics, Neotherics, Avacta, I don't think I've mentioned, TPP, EMIS in the digital health space. So a lot of players that can really contribute to the benefit of this region in MedTech, and can enable the vision of Leeds City Region or Yorkshire as a MedTech innovation hub to be realized. Digital health is a significant part of this. Remember what I talked about earlier about convergence. So again, Leeds City Region figures recognize that there are around revenues of 500 million in Leeds City Region from the digital health companies, and they employ over 5,000 people. And of course, this brings in highly trained people. People come in because there's a cluster now of these significant companies. And the presence of NHS digital headquarters is a further draw to set up in this region, or to make sure companies set up in this region and the right people with the right skills and background and expertise come in for that reason. So there's significant businesses such as EMIS, Acton Medical Information Systems, and the Phoenix Partnerships, TPP. There's significant players in this. And then they're producing significant solutions such as My Pathway, which is a clinician, secure patient clinician service provider communication channel. So the clinician can use that to ensure that she identifies the best appropriate pathway for a patient, and the patient has sight of that too. Pain Sense is a persistent pain self-management application system, self-management application system. Again, digital, so that the patient can take some control and manage their persistent pain through an app and that system. these are examples. These are by no means exhaustive. So that's our industry strength, if you like, the industry part of the equation. Let's look at the university. So bringing it home specifically to University of Leeds and the Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering, has this tagline of engineering 50 active years after 50. So very much the challenging the perception that our active years are finished at 50 plus. They're not, and it's really talking about how MedTech can ensure 50 active years after 50, or get us closer to that goal at least. So the slide just shows a few things that are going on at IMBI, or the kind of pillars of IMBI. So just take you through those very quickly. Working with companies, in this case DePuy, to improve device development, ensure that feeds into improved surgery and improved patient outcomes. So a lot of work has gone on into this hip system, the ceramic hip system, and that's a lot of collaborative work with the University of IMBI and the DePuy company. Working with DePuy to get better evidence of component positioning when it's within the body. So a lot of modeling going on, and understanding how systems wear. So this is a simulator that will just be going through a cycle of hip movement or knee movement many millions of times. So in other words, you can accelerate the expected wear, normal wear and tear that a patient would, or an individual would experience daily on that joint. So we can get a lot, or they can get a lot of information using these kind of technologies. Collaborative work in this case with DePuy. Here's tissue eugenics work, which was spun out from the university, for the institute, into this company that became tissue eugenics. And this is a decellularized device, medical device, decellularized, as the slide on the left shows, blood vessels, meniscus, dermis, heart valves, vascular patches, ligaments, ACL ligaments, and so on. And this is the same concept really as the resorbable polymer stuff that I showed you earlier. Again, it provides a platform for cells, patient's own cells, to migrate into that scaffold and allow the body to heal itself. And finally, just going back to that simulation, the modeling. So there's hardware modeling, if you will, with hip systems, knee systems in development. There's also in silico modeling. What might be happening with wear, with load on, in this case, a vertebrae. So a lot of that work is ongoing and feeds, obviously. The remit is to feed that into industry and to allow that to go into the commercial side and be tested appropriately. There's a lot of other things going on in Leeds. I won't go through all those things now, but we do span the right range, I think, of emerging and important medical technologies. So just named a few people on my slide that I work with, or have worked with: Pete Calmer, Shane Z, working on AI and medical robots. Zhang Zhang, who does work on digital health and wearable technologies, and my interest in wound and tissue repair. So I want to just use the last part of this talk really to talk about how this all comes together. So I've told you about the large companies, the SMEs. So we really say that the strengths in the Yorkshire region, Leeds City region, Yorkshire wider, come from this cluster of companies and players and the ecosystem So we need not just companies, but we need the academics doing maybe the earlier work, the academics that can do some more thorough testing than industry could do at first. We need those universities, and we need research-focused clinicians as well. So we have research-focused NHS trusts in the regions, Leeds Teaching Hospitals Trust, Hull, Sheffield Teaching Hospitals Trust as well. And ideally, we need some way of connecting those things. So an organisation like Medilink, membership organisation, or the IKC, will be able to bring those different players together and possibly, if all is well, nucleate ideas and collaborations in developing new MedTech. We're very keen in the IKC, but also I use this in my company, using this system, the technology readiness level system, TRL system, adapted really for the MedTech development process, but obviously applicable to a wide number of other industries. But it's a measured sequential process of looking at needs, clinical needs identification, ideas generation, testing those solutions, taking them through the stages of development. At some stage here, maybe after TRL3, we need to do a proof of concept. So can we challenge this idea with a system which is developed sufficiently, to be a challenge? And let's be rigorous about this, because if it's not going to pass that proof of concept, it's not worth the investment further down the line. So the proof of concept is very important. And it's at that stage or post that stage that industry may become more involved. Industry sees that quite a lot of risk is now being removed. There's proof of concept. There's an awful lot to do to develop this product, but the proof of concept is there. So industry are more likely to want to be involved, at least at that stage, maybe collaboratively in that product development. So we'll see more collaborative development going on around this 3 to 5 TRL stage. After that stage, though, things become pretty expensive. Is industry going to invest in a new manufacturing system? We need to make sure that outlay is going to be, or has a chance of being, recouped further down when the product is on the market. Okay, that's all checked out. Let's make sure it works in the clinical situation. So again, we need our research-focused clinicians to work with us to develop a clinical trial protocol, test that product in the clinic. And obviously there are very rigorous requirements before we can get into the clinic. So a great deal of testing needs to be done by in this case, the manufacturer, to verify that there is no or very, very, very low risk to the patient. Can we understand all those risks? Can we control all those risks? So that's TRL 7 and 8. Get past that stage, then we're talking about, okay, can we manufacture sufficient stock of this? If we put it on the market, who's going to buy it? What price point are we going to put it at, and so on. So we'll go through this TRL system to get from bench to bedside. If we successfully launch a product, then we need to understand how it's being used in the clinic, in the market. So can we enhance, a second generation product using, again, the same new product development process? So I've told you quite a lot about how this is not the only route for development, of course, and not the only process that people use. They may use a stage gate system, may use other systems, but it needs to be carefully controlled. And our regulators need to know, they will ask us, have you designed this? What evidence have you got to enable you to design it in this way? So we need to have all that in the design history file. So it's quite a good way of ensuring that nothing is missed in in a product development in MedTech. You need to understand the customer needs, patient needs, the clinician need. There's other customers involved, the NHS trust that might buy it, the GP that might be wanting to use it. We need to understand all those needs. We need to understand the market, what's out there already. Does it do the job as well as your system? If it does, are you able to produce it at a much lower price than what exists today? So loads of considerations really before something can be said, not just to be launched, but to be a successful launch in the market. I really want to say that we need all these players, academics, businesses and clinicians, which we call the ABC triumvirate. So I've talked about the academics work in the early stages, and effectively they're doing a lot of de-risking of a concept. It may be their idea and they want, they're invested in that. They want to de-risk it. It may be something which was collaboratively developed, or the ideas came in from industry and the academic worked further on it, further on them. But that will be the ideal combination. Business will come through, will become more involved more prominently, as I say, after the proof of concept, after some de-risking, and the clinician early on. So we need to understand from the clinician how will he use it? What happens today? Does that work well? Does that work not well? So the clinician is really important in explaining the clinical need. But we need them further down that line for the clinical trials, and then to help us to work out how to translate it into clinical use. So all those players are needed. And the Leeds City region, the good news, the Leeds City region is very well set up for that kind of collaboration, this ABC type collaboration. And this really, it really works for an SME, because the SME is not going to have the resources, a specialist research and development department in the same way that a Depew or a Smith Nephew would have. Okay, complicated slide, but shows you something again about the ecosystem and these initiatives that help at these stages, so translate at the early stages, grow MedTech, getting into this sort of intermediate stage when the concept's being developed, validation, refinements going on. But after this stage, it becomes too expensive to do anything in academia. We need the private investment at that stage. Maybe that's venture capital money, maybe it's corporate venturing. Maybe there's some, maybe at this point, just about some public money that could go in. But by this point, it's becoming a commercial proposition. So it's unlikely that we'll get, or companies will get much public sector money at this stage. So we're relying on the private investment. And again, if work has been done at these levels here to de-risk the idea, the company is going to be more inclined to put that money in. They're risking the money. They haven't got a product that's earning them revenue yet, but they're assessing the opportunities for a successful product. And of course, they're not going to invest if it hasn't got that potential, or they're going to stop it if they've been funding up to that point. Going back to the university, the university has a successful record in patents, but particularly here, I'm talking about spinning out companies. And I've mentioned some of these already. So Tissue Regenetics, Creava, I've mentioned, Evacta was on the slide previously as well. So the university has a successful record in spinning out new companies. And, I could give this talk if I was talking about the University of Sheffield, and they would say similar things. So universities are really important in spinning out innovative companies based on the IP developed by academics, and academics may have a stake in that company. It's up to them in terms of how they want to see their career developing. But industry is really important. We need to spin out or establish SMEs that will become robust players in this industry, in this sector. One of my favorite slides is from this guy, Buddy Ratner. Buddy Ratner says nothing is accomplished in the real world, unless it's adopted by industry. So really good academic work needs to see light of day through industry. Academic scientists don't manufacture devices, and paper in science cannot save lives. So it's the industry guys eventually that take the final risk and say, I'm going to manufacture this, I'm going to produce this, and it's going to be important in the overall care of patients. Okay, so that all sounds great. Why doesn't it happen more frequently, and why is there any risk? Well, of course, there is risk in any business. So there are things that don't work so well. Sometimes there's poor connectivity between organizations and companies and sectors. Maybe there aren't the skills at the right level to do the kind of work that companies and those collaborations need. Maybe there's low level investment, regional investment coming from players in the region, but also coming from national infrastructure. Maybe that's lagging behind. Maybe there's poor access to the NHS that will help us to do that testing. So we're seeing those as barriers, but we're seeing those things improve with time as the importance and the priorities are clearly understood. So I want to just spend the last couple of minutes just talking about the kind of work that I've been doing at the university and wider. So I was a visiting professor for a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor for 3 years, and I set up a thing called MedTech Best, which is business and entrepreneurial skills training, and we give students the opportunity to develop a hypothetical new product, and they're required to look at the clinical background. It has to have a real need. It doesn't. In this case, it's not a real product, so they don't have time to do that, but there has to be a real clinical need that this thing addresses. So those students take the role of a startup founder member. They develop a business plan. They pitch it to a set of expert judges that are skilled in this field. And eventually, in a Dragon's Den type situation, the judges decide on a winner. So we get the students really to test their entrepreneurial skills in this way. And they develop a lot of insights that they wouldn't have had without the MedTech Best system. Undergraduate students as well, currently I encourage their sort of thinking on innovation through the course that I run called MedTech Futures, which is an undergraduate course taught on campus, but also a MOOC. So anyone in the world can access this course now. And it takes people through the history of MedTech. And you can see on the slide here the different hip systems that have been developed over the last 50 plus years. So Charnley hip there, that one. But then the ceramic hip that I talked about a few slides ago as well. What drives that innovation? New materials, new opportunities, new manufacturing technologies, and so on, but new knowledge. So that has to be translated into improved products. MedTech still needs to overcome a number of challenges. How much automation are we comfortable with in healthcare? We talk in the course about medical robots, surgical robots, but we talk about things like bots, which might provide emotional support to medical technology. Public perception. There are a number of scandals that really rock confidence. Vaginal mesh implants, the PIP breast implant, they're scandals. The PIP one is criminal fraud. Others have been, the regulations have not been applied tightly enough. So we have to make sure that there are no big slips like that happening again. not everybody's comfortable with convergence. Do I want my hip implant to send a signal to somebody to tell them that there's some wear going on here that needs some intervention? Not everybody's comfortable with that. What about big data? You know, the NHS is such a source of patient data, or such a receptacle for big patient data. That data obviously can be hacked. It can leak. Is it secure? So we need to overcome all those challenges and confidence to ensure that growth continues. Okay, so a lot of this comes back down to the SIA. So it did confirm that the companies are out there in the Leeds City region, that there will be convergence of technologies like AI, wireless, like wearables, all those things, and that, you know, the market is going to grow with greater levels of convergence. Those developments that I've put on the screen here, those things are happening now: miniaturization, new materials, incorporation of AI into devices, mobile health apps we're pretty familiar with now. So all those things are happening now. And just to give you a what if those things that you're familiar with, the hip implant, the wound dressing, the stethoscope, were now enabled with other technologies? What would you see? Well, you might see the stethoscope having an AI component that guides the clinician as to what you might be hearing. We will see miniaturization, all those things. We might just have regeneration, not just repair for the hip system, the wound dressing. That lifetime tracking idea that I just mentioned might be in the hip. So a wireless signal might be sent out saying this is loosening, or this is not performing as it should anymore, or there's wear going on. So that's a glimpse of what the future might look like, and I might get to. Okay, I'll leave you with that. Just to say, there's a lot going on in the region still. The new health tech centre, Leeds City Region Health Tech, the Centre for Health Tech Innovation at the University of Leeds, and the LGI. But other things like the Innovation District, again, involving those players, but more, and other initiatives that are happening now. There's a new Leeds City Region Health Tech strategy due soon, so that will pick these things up and take this further. But I'll leave it there. Happy to chat on and answer questions if I'm able to. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mike. Malcolm, could you unmute everybody just so we can thank Mike in the traditional way?
I can. Well, people can individually unmute, I think.
I'm there. Okay, right.
But I can.
I always assume you're omnipotent, Malcolm.
I haven't found out how to unmute everyone at the same time.
It doesn't matter. Anyway, let's just, anybody who can, let's just clap. Thanks very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting. Just to say, I should have said at the start of the talk, if anybody wants to post any questions in the chat, feel free to do so. We'll go through those when we come back. And obviously we'll have an opportunity to ask questions afterwards as well when we get back. So what we normally do is take a brief break now. So could I suggest a break of 10 minutes?
Yeah.
That will bring us back for 25 to 9. So give you a chance to get a cup of tea and come back, and we'll see you then. Okay. So we'll just start off with the first one. I'll just read it out for those who don't have the chat in front of them. It's quite a long one. Do you think the UK has missed an opportunity with Brexit? All the indications are that the new UK CA mark starting in 2023 will closely follow the MDR standards of the EU, which has a very high, whoops, just gone past it, very high, can't find it, excuse me, very high clinical evidence threshold and increases the time of product development to commercial launch. This on the face of it would seem to reduce the chance of innovative SMEs being attracted to the UK. So yeah, so Mike, any thoughts on that?
Quite a few, Harvey, on that. Not necessarily in particularly helpful order, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I deal with this a lot in my company. So we were expecting the medical device regulation to come in MDR to come in to replace the MDD, the Medical Device Directive. They got held up, or we were in a transition period for quite a long time. That was then pushed back a bit further. And that wasn't a Brexit concession. That was just because companies were struggling really to meet all those new requirements of the MDR. Post-Brexit, currently we're operating under the previous system, the MDD, but a slightly revised version of that. But yes, as the question says, the medical device regulation, the MDR, will come into full force in a couple of years' time, or just over a year and a bit's time. And yes, there are greater thresholds, evidence thresholds required there. In a sense, we were expecting it to come anyway. So I don't think there's a huge disadvantage that it will apply, because it applies throughout Europe anyway, and we need to meet those standards. The UK CA, the UK I can't remember what that's for. Commercial authorization, it doesn't stand for that, but effectively that's the equivalent of CE mark. That requires us to jump through particular hoops that are specific to the UK to sell, or to have a CE mark that can enable us to place it on the market throughout Europe. A single market does require the MDR to be observed today. So to answer the question, I suppose Brexit would only give us an advantage if we said we won't have anything to do with the MDR. We're only going to concentrate on what we need to sell, to put onto the UK market. But that would mean that we wouldn't have the same access to the single market, single European market, and meet the standards for that. And of course, CE mark is a European mark, but it's recognized in other major markets as well, like Turkey. So recognize the CE mark. So we still need it in the sense we have to do both now, the UK CA and the CE mark. So it isn't a help to innovative SMEs. It's not a help, that's for sure.
Just puts the costs up.
It does put the cost up, and you've got to do. I mean, on a basic level, on a critical level, we need a notified body to audit us against the CE mark or UKCA mark. And there's a real bottleneck of finding those organizations, or having those organizations that do that work. So to have two streams, it doesn't help.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. And next question from John and Jenny. Given the billions spent on COVID MedTech with mixed results and some corruption, what role do you see for public investment, manufacturing and research versus a market-driven approach?
Well, that's a very pertinent question, that's for sure. I think some of the things that we've needed, the huge amounts of PPE, they're almost a commodity. They have to meet standards, they have to comply with standards, but a company that can produce those just really needs scale and the right kind of equipment to do that. So I don't think that now needs public investment. Companies know exactly what to do, and they know exactly what will meet the required standard. More interventional devices and MedTech will, I think, need that encouragement from the public sector investment or public sector grants. So to make sure they get to the right level and then attract the right level of private sector investment, we still need that balance, in my view. But it depends on how much it now becomes a commodity. The obviously PPE, but the lateral flow devices, we can produce those. Actually, can produce them up the road from me here in York, but we can't we can't meet the same cost base as a Chinese manufacturer can. So it's that kind of thing. The UK probably is not going to be producing lots of lateral flow devices because we just cannot, get the cost down low enough. So again, it's looking at the higher end of an interventional device that we should be concentrating on.
Was there something like 80% of the investment in the research for the vaccines was publicly funded or something? It was quite a high figure, wasn't it?
There was I don't know if it's as high as that, but it's certainly a high figure. And vaccine development costs a huge amount of money. Normally takes years or decades. Much of that had to be really fast tracked. So the companies are making money on it, but there must have been plenty of companies that tried and failed to develop a viable vaccine.
Just as a side to this, just before I move to the next one, do you think there'll be sort of attempts by the regulatory bodies to try and learn the lessons from the COVID experience about whether it was possible to fast track things more effectively, do you think?
I'm sure that there's a lot of learning that's gone on there because the perception, the popular perception is you couldn't do things as fast as that. And even when, the news of the Pfizer vaccine was being made public to us, there was still a lot of skepticism as to whether they'd cut any corners. And obviously they had to qualify it to FDA, to MHRA and so on. So no corners were cut. So it's a very impressive set of work. Of course, there had to be that initial work to identify the target, if you like. How's that vaccine going to work? And publicly funded work on the whole, really, really high quality stuff.
Great, thank you. Next question, how big could person-specific medical devices get? Will this always be a niche market, or does 3D printing and other technologies make this a mainstream option in the future, do you think?
Okay. I think, that's a very good question. The 3D printing does allow personalized devices to be made. So one of the nice things I like the concept being that your clinic or your surgeon can be anywhere in the world. They can be taking the measurement of that particular patient, sending it off, so the dimensions, someone translates it into a program. They may print it somewhere else. They may send it back to that clinical site for printing. So it enables this patient-specific piece to happen. And of course, it allows it to happen at speed and relatively low cost. There are some problems there about regulation. How do you ensure that what's been measured, what's been transmitted, what's been printed, are the appropriate, have met the appropriate standards? So there's some challenges in that that need to be overcome. I think they will be overcome in time. 3D printing and other personalized devices, though, I think largely a niche because of those challenges right now, and making bespoke devices and materials is always going to be not at scale by definition. So it's difficult to see it growing, overtaking things like a hip implant, for instance. It's unlikely to overtake anything like that. But of course, it can be done if it can be shown to have an equivalent performance. It can be done much more cheaply than that metal implant.
How are materials restrictions now, Mike, in terms of use of MedTech applications? Are materials being developed which are 3D printable and have the?
Yes, there are. Yes, I mean you can do an awful lot with 3D printing now, including printing some metals. So that's developing at pace. I know people that do that, and we talk in my East Africa work to companies that have set up 3D printing operations there, and it's the materials are there, the cost savings are there, As I say, I'm more concerned about the regulation of those devices than the overall performance.
Okay, thank you. Reinhard, do you want to unmute yourself? I think there's a few questions you have. Perhaps you can express them more eloquently than I can.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure whether I can do it more eloquently, but I will try. I'm a retired medical doctor, and I worked 12 years in Africa, so some of the questions are related to that, not all of them. So one is related to the recent COVID. I mean, and you mentioned the cost factor, that certain things can be produced cheaper in China or elsewhere. However, with the protective equipment, we discovered that all came from Wuhan, and there was a high price to be paid in the UK because there was a huge shortage of this equipment. And I'm sure with the climate crisis, there will be further disruptions of global supply chains. And I wonder, whether there is any initiative or thought about relocalizing or regionalizing medical supply chains. And actually not just look at the cost factor. So that is my first question. The second one, because you seem to be a specialist in this tissue regeneration, there's always been a problem in medicine with fascia, sort of surgical hernias. And as far as I know, there was never any real sort of type of medical technology which could sort of repair them, and the success rate is quite low. So I just wanted to know, is there any news on this front? Because it seems to be such a simple issue, but seems to be quite complicated to get adequate material for fascia repairs or repairs of surgical hernias. Third one was about now the enormous waste, which is especially visible with the, again, COVID pandemic. Do we need more reusable, recyclable, compostable, simple medical technology, for instance, PPE syringes? Is this a research area? Because you mentioned a lot of research areas, but this green research area to reduce waste, to avoid waste, didn't appear. So I don't know whether this is a focus of some companies. And from my experience in Africa, as I said, I worked 12 years, a lot of technology lasts just when the donor comes and hands it over, but the technology is difficult to maintain, difficult to repair, sometimes also maybe not suitable for tropical climate. So is there any initiative in this area to make technology more suitable, easy repairable, easy maintenance, so that it actually can work in low-income countries under simple conditions? So sorry for these many questions.
Okay, that's fine, Reinhard. Thank you. As I've got them on my screen, I'll do that in that order that you've put them in. Global supply chains in PPE particularly. Yes, the problem is, as I say, the manufacturing, the cost base of manufacturing. It shouldn't be difficult, should it, to be able to manufacture PPE, various things that we are using and need anywhere in the world. But there is that that cost challenge, I think, to keep that cost down as low as it needs to be. And as I say, at the moment, some of the cost that's being incurred is a bit hidden to us. So we don't necessarily know how much. I don't pay anything for my lateral flow devices currently, but if I did, I'd be thinking about, what have I got the right standard, and am I paying the right price for that device? So it's a difficult one. It's, so much in medicine, medtech, as pharma as well, is based on, is it safe? Is it safe? Can you be absolutely sure it's safe? Do you want to take a risk on this? Nobody would want to take a risk on it. So it's a tricky one to open that up. As I say, a lot of it at the moment is cost driven, but if it wasn't, can the right standards of safety be guaranteed? So it's a very tricky thing, I think,
If
to
I
see
may
that.
interrupt, if you look at the
undone.
5G technology discussion or military technology, I'm sure it would not be outsourced to China, would it? I mean,
No, you're
so
absolutely right. You wouldn't. It wouldn't.
regardless of the cost.
Yeah, yeah. But I suspect that, and I don't know where so much is produced, but I suspect if it wasn't allowed to be in China, then it would be being produced in Thailand or Philippines. Those economies that have got some expertise in these areas. Okay, fascial tissue repair. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, some of the problems arise from non-resorbable materials that are going to be there always, and they eventually provoke some reaction, some tissue reaction. So the end repair, the cosmesis of the end repair is not always as good as we would hope, as the producers hope. So some of the opportunities there are still using some of those materials that are non-resorbable, but coating them with a polymer that will encourage that tissue integration, early on tissue integration, and then gradually be degraded or be resorbed. But there's still the potential, I think, for there to be adhesions and so on later down the line. So at the moment, there's not yet. I mean, the problem is often that there has to be sufficient strength in tissue repair, and that can't always be introduced in the initial stages. So you need something which is going to do that job and provide sufficient strength. But you also want something that's going to integrate. So getting that balance right is particularly difficult. I mean, some things like polylactic acid, PLLA, will degrade very, very slowly, or polycaprolactam will degrade very, very slowly, but they will degrade and be resorbed. And maybe that's a kind of material that needs to be looked at more closely. Recyclable, I don't know enough about this, I'm afraid. More reusable, recyclable, compostable, simple medical technology. I would say yes, but again, you know, what if it has that kind of built-in compostable element, does it mean that the shelf life is going to be quite short? So I think probably the syringes that you would get probably have a shelf life, an expiry date of probably 5 years from sterilization. So you'd be changing that kind of that part of the supply chain. I'm sure it's possible. I don't know how much will there is to do that at the moment. I haven't really seen that, but I agree with you. The enormous waste that goes on right now is significant, and it must all have to be incinerated, of course, with other consequences. Your fourth question is really, really interesting. Something I'm doing at the moment in East Africa. So I'm working with a university in Uganda and other colleagues in Kenya, but I've looked at the situation across East Africa. We're just extending that to look at West Africa now, actually. So yes, I'm trying to understand the barriers to local manufacture, because they understand their population's healthcare needs better than anybody else, effectively. So rather than relying, and so many of these, as you probably know, so many of these countries rely on things being imported and don't really trust the local production. We're trying to overcome that perception and help them a bit with the regulations of this country are difficult. They're terribly difficult in Uganda, in that even the regulators don't really know how to regulate a new product. So the producer really is up against it. But we really want to see that happening. And even with big kit like an X-ray machine or an MRI machine, we really want to be able to see the training, appropriate training for local biomedical engineers, biomedical technicians, to be able to service it when you know, the service contract runs out. So at the moment, it's not satisfactory. most of these countries will, will buy a big piece of kit, but once the contractors run out, it doesn't get serviced properly.
Could I just follow up on that, Mike? I mean, does it mean that the costs are just prohibitive then for local producers, given you've been talking about the costs escalating potentially in making it a big company's game, really? Is that a similar issue in Africa?
I think it has to be appropriate technology to the situation. So I'm not advocating that, there is an MRI producer in every country in Africa. It's just not viable. That's really big capital kit. So it's still going to be the Siemens or the GEs and Philips that would do that, but they really do need to make it more open source in terms of how it works and how you can service it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Janie, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, it's Dougal's question, so he'll ask it. Wait a minute. Yeah.
Yes, the first question, again, developing countries.
Yeah.
We know how, say, very early on, very quickly, mobiles dramatically changed finance in developing countries.
Yeah.
Could the same, in situations where, say, there are very few doctors per head of population and transport is difficult, could AI and diagnostics do the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. And I know it's not a naive question, actually. I think there's good potential there for that to happen, because you're supplying quite a lot of knowledge, if you like, in that AI system, that learning that the AI system is equipped with and will keep learning. So it must be at least an augmentation to the local expertise. Could they leapfrog the West? Yeah, I think, again, if you're dealing with Zika virus, you're probably the people that really have the incentive to get something that works or diagnoses it accurately. So yeah, I think there's a good deal in what you say there. Yeah. Yeah. Should I go on? Factors that led to the Leeds City region becoming a leader in MedTech. I think, I'm not really saying to you that Leeds City region has a lead over any other region of the country, the UK, but it certainly has the critical building blocks to make sure it has a good position and maintains that position. So yes, the established companies, they're research-based companies. They're not just manufacturing companies. They are research-based. Smith Nephew, Johnson & Johnson, DePuy, and so on. They do a lot of research, and they're looking across the world, but they're looking also at the what comes out of their labs locally. Opportunities across the world they bring in to the Leeds City region. So we need to make sure those companies stay in the region and nucleate that kind of initiative. And my Global Challenges Research Project, I've talked about this a bit. That's the East Africa work. We essentially looked at biomedical engineering as a specialty, how it was taught in universities, how much encouragement the countries gave to that training. So if you look at the national plans of these countries, they talk about the need for more biomedical engineers, BMEs. But very often there's not really the joined upness of saying to a university, you train more, we want more trained, but there's almost like no career system for them to go into after graduation. So that's one of the things that we've been looking at. We haven't got a solution, but we're really pointing it out to the ministries of health that you want more, but actually you're not doing enough with what you've got, and you really need to make sure they're recognised, the role is recognised, the status is recognised, and so on. And then again, looking at the local production of MedTech, you need countries who need to be able to encourage that by appropriate regulations and incentives at city level. So yeah, that's what we're looking at right now. We're just about to produce a report on that. It's been a bit of a labour of love to get that out, but it's nearly there.
Presumably governments need to, like Uganda, government needs to provide quite a lot of investment to get things up and running.
Yeah, they do. They do. But again, it's quite difficult to actually unpick what goes on and who pays for what. In some, is it always Ministry of Health, and is it the how are the universities funded and those kind of things? Quite difficult necessarily to figure that out. But we've got a long way. When we've got a whole set of 5 recommendations that go to policymakers and governments. That's ready to go. So we'll see what they do with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Priscilla, would you like to ask your question?
You're unmuted.
No, I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Sorry. I wondered how you presumably you get different research projects produced to you. I wondered how you decided between something like, say, wound healing, which is obviously of very general benefit, to something that would only benefit people suffering from something specific. And I've just thought of scleroderma, but anything like that, where there would be, that obviously the commercial returns wouldn't be enormous. How do you decide?
A very good question. Part of what you look at is the market, obviously the number of procedures that are carried out, number of patients. Eventually, you get down to how many patients are there in the population, what's the incidence, the prevalence of the whatever you're trying to produce a solution to. Can you therefore do something which is, so it might be quite expensive, this, but if there's no good solution right now, you actually and it works, you're going to be saving money for the health service. So it's really looking at all those factors. What happens today? Is that satisfactory? Is it what the clinicians would say is a real pain? Do we need to find a painkiller for that? Or is it, it's not very satisfactory, but nobody's prepared to pay much more for it than this. So it's always a very difficult balance, and sometimes this is where you really do need public sector money at the beginning. Otherwise, it never get beyond the sort of first or second stage. There just isn't the impetus to do that. But if you get the public sector money, convince our Innovate UK, who fund a lot of this stuff in public and private sector, that it's an important opportunity, then at least you've got a few stages and you've de-risked some of it before you expect some bigger money to go into it.
Can you give us an example of something that's been developed along those lines that would perhaps be of minority use?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of something which I'm working on at the moment, which is a device for repairing fistula. So it's not a pleasant condition to describe, but essentially this is an abnormal passage opening between your bowel and your perianal skin. And what happens right now, it's happened for 50 years, is quite a simple procedure which allows that to drain. Doesn't cost very much, but then again, it doesn't heal it, just manages it. So what we've come up with something we think can manage and heal it. It will cost more, but of course then that patient is discharged. He or she is not part of the active patient pool in a particular clinic or hospital. So there's that kind of thing. It will cost more, but it will actually do the job where the current low-cost solution really doesn't do the job.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That leads nicely into my question, really, which is asking really how does the UK compare in terms of medtech with other European countries, and which are the strong place? I suppose, Mike, just following on what Priscilla was asking, I mean, you're saying about, you know, the importance of funding fundamental research. How does this, so you've got the MRC, the Medical Research Council, and you've got the Wellcome Trust. Is the UK unique in that regard of having two major funding sources for biomedical research? Does that differ from other European countries?
Other European countries, it's probably equivalent to a number, so to major European countries. It's probably equivalent. It's not better than, not better than the US system. That's certain. So I mean, so we're very fortunate to have the Wellcome Trust, which is a major player, definitely a major player. And of course, that's not public money. That's charity money. So they're important, but they are very selective in what they do fund. So you have to qualify very exactly for their funding.
Is quality the overriding? Is research quality and the overriding criterion for them, or as Priscilla was saying, you're allowed to look at the potential benefits as well while you're scoring them, the proposals?
I don't know enough about Wellcome's scoring system, so I can't really comment on that. We'd have to say that MRC, EPSRC, Research Council, they're probably more important to us in MedTech than the MRC. So EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Science Research Centre Council, funded a significant amount of early stage MedTech. Of course, it gets to that point when it's got to the proof of concept and slightly beyond that, and then that's difficult. They won't fund it any further. But EPSRC really important.
Does Innovate UK step in it?
Yeah, Innovate UK would be, if I'm from industry, I can't get Research Council money into my company. It's not allowed. I can get Innovate UK money into the company, and that can also fund an academic collaborator and a clinical collaborator. And that's really good. So we can get all three.
Your experience of that within your own company, have you had Innovate UK projects in your company?
A lot of Innovate UK money, yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It's difficult to get now. It's always been difficult to get, but it's particularly difficult to get today. But we have been successful, certainly, in a number of big grants.
I know AI is a big theme in Innovate UK generally. So what you're saying earlier about the confluence of AI and MedTech, presumably anything which has got AI will have a pretty good, it'll tick a lot of the boxes. That's quite a cynical way of looking at it, but it's a reality.
Yeah, but these things go for a little while there, and then the standards and expectations do get a lot higher. They get wise very quickly that people just add in AI to what they were going to do anyway. So
well, that's a big part of the Leeds MedTech Centre, isn't it? AI is a big part of what Leeds does, isn't it?
Yeah, used appropriately, it really is. It's going to change so much. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks.
What is Innovate UK? Is it
okay? So it's public money. Used to be called the Technology Strategy Board when it was set up, but really it's there to fund early stage R&D in companies, but also partnering with universities and in our case clinicians. It's now part of the UK RI, UK Research and Innovation, which also covers all the Research Council. So it's basically the industry-facing part of the Research Council network, funding network.
I mean, it's interesting, Jenny. Actually, the Innovate UK is as I say, it's there to get business involved with it. It's some of the long-standing schemes I've had. I mean, we've had within the university lots of what are called knowledge transfer partnerships, haven't we? And that's had a variety of names, but it's survived for 50 years. I think it's one of the few schemes that year on year is being increased because of the added value it offers. So you know, the statistics really show just how successful they are in terms of leveraging research investment and what it leads to longer term as well. So there are some good schemes. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike. You seem to have got through the questions so far. I'll just give if anybody wants to post a last question, I'll just give you the opportunity to do that, or to unmute yourself and ask a question.
I would just like to ask one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned, I think, as one of the things that might be difficult would be collaboration with the NHS. I just wondered how far you get. It's easy to get information, collaboration with consultants and so on, or are there problems there?
The problems really are, these are very busy people. And if I want some time from a consultant, I've really got some funds to buy out their time. So basically, if they spend an afternoon with me, the NHS will need to provide someone to backfill that person's clinical work. So that may be a locum, and maybe a colleague that can do that, but it's not, for obvious reasons, going to be free to me. So I have to have some funds to be able to do that, to buy out their time for a day or 2 days or whatever is needed. And obviously that money has to be found through a grant, or if it's a company making revenue, then perhaps they can afford to do that. But that's a challenge, really. Some clinicians have something in their contract that allows them to spend a day a month doing research or collaborative research, but it's pressured, and for obvious reasons. Those are people that are key people in the health service. So that's the challenge, really. Not that they don't want to talk to you, but really they often don't have the time to do it.
Can I ask something about your collaborations with the East Africa? Sound wonderful.
Yeah.
But my links are with Madagascar, which is one of the poorest countries, which has a minimal health budget, no universal health service, and very little money in the universities. How would you begin to help in those sort of low-income countries?
Yes, again, that's a good question, Anne. My experience in Uganda is pretty similar to that. They've been talking about universal health coverage. There's a bill that was introduced in nearly 20 years ago that's still not enacted. That is extremely difficult, and people will make their way to a hospital and just wait until they get some treatment, and it's obviously very difficult for them in terms of their normal activity and their normal life. I don't see an easy solution. Some of these medical technology innovations will help, because it's not, they're preventing, if they were used properly, preventing some of those illnesses and disorders making their way to the clinics and the hospitals.
Yeah, and some things like prostheses, if they were really good and would survive going away from the centres, hours away, that would be a great advance.
Indeed, yes, but there's these are very difficult and complex problems, and some of it comes down to, as I say, national will. If they look at this investment, although it's an investment, is going to save money further down, because it's preventing other health issues occurring.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to pause in case any final questions at all. But Mike has been working very hard, I think.
I just maybe one quick question.
All right, okay, Jim.
Sorry, Mike.
Okay.
You mentioned early on that there was an issue with, when you were looking at the kind of the downsides. You said that there was a big problem perhaps with lack of skills people. in the region. I mean,
Mhm.
is the government tackling this issue in what you would consider a sort of a proper way? Is it addressing these problems?
No, not really. What happens that, you know, and graduates are produced in industry, we find that they're not really, they don't really have the right skills to slot straight into an industry job. So we need to, in industry, we need to invest in them for a year or so before they're really effective. And part of what I've been doing with that MedTech Best is saying to them, students, you've actually got to learn these skills as well. And those that put together the curriculum, you've got to be thinking about that. And that is getting through. It is getting through. It's be a slow change, but it is getting through. So producing what I call industry-ready graduates is really one of my missions, I'd say. So, but it's a slow sell, if you like, to get that message across.
Okay, thank you. I won't think of any more questions.
You're allowed to ask if you want.
Yeah, it's not my bedtime yet.
Right, anybody else? Any more for any more? Okay, well, I think that is probably it.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll tell you what, could I just give a brief commercial for the next meeting?
Of course you
on
can.
Cafe Economic.
course
But
you
actually, there are only 9 people left, but I'm speaking for converted. But anyway, it's a month today, Tuesday, the 1st of March, and it's John Pulis, who I think a lot of people know. He's a retired paediatrician. And he's talking about, the title is, the NHS is being privatised. Does it matter? And he's concerned about a large percentage of the NHS budget going to the private sector, and he's going to have some specific examples from the COVID episode, like the cost of PPE, etc. So anyway, that's a month today. So anyone would be very welcome to come.
Okay,
And it's going to be online. Perhaps the last one we have to have online. We don't know.
Yeah, possibly. Okay, thank you very much, Priscilla. Thank you. Okay, I think we're more or less done. Well, Mike, just to sort of thank you for a very interesting talk. Thanks for answering the questions so effectively as well. And we'll just finish just by, if we can just, in the traditional manner, just thank Mike for his time and his expertise. So thanks very much, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you.